Alright Reddit, buckle up because this just happened, and I'm still trying to process the sheer audacity of it all. My name is Jonathan Brooks, and I live in what you might call an upper-class neighborhood. Translation: houses are ridiculously expensive, and some of the residents have a sense of entitlement that could curdle milk. I worked my tail off to get where I am. Years of grinding, sacrifices, and a little bit of luck allowed me to buy my dream home a few years back. A sprawling ranch with a gorgeous backyard, complete with a pool that's basically my personal oasis. I'm talking waterfall feature, underwater lighting, the whole shebang. After a long day putting out fires, more on that later, there's nothing I love more than unwinding with a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon and a swim under the setting sun. Enter Karen Majors, my delightful next-door neighbor. From the moment I moved in, she made it abundantly clear that I wasn't exactly her ideal neighbor. It started subtly, the overly long stares, muttered comments about property values, the classic passive-aggressive nonsense. But it quickly escalated. She'd complain about my music being too loud, even when it was barely audible, the way I parked my car, the landscaping. You name it, she found something to criticize. And, let's be honest, there was always a racial undertone to her complaints. The thinly veiled microaggressions, the assumptions about my background, the way she'd emphasize certain words when talking to me, it was all there. I tried to ignore it, to be the bigger person. I figured, kill her with kindness, right? But kindness only seemed to fuel her fire. The thing she seemed most jealous of, though, was my success. She would make snide remarks about how I was only this high up because of affirmative action and the like. My cars were too flashy, my vacations too extravagant, my house too nice. It was pathetic, really. I've caught her staring at my house on several occasions, a look of pure resentment etched on her face. It was like she couldn't stand the fact that a black man had achieved something she clearly felt entitled to. The tension had been building for months, and I knew it was only a matter of time before something truly blew up. I just never expected it to happen quite like this. Today was a scorcher, the kind of day where you practically melt into the sidewalk. I'd had a particularly stressful shift at work, dealing with some serious personnel issues and a budget crisis. All I wanted was to escape the chaos and find some peace by the pool. I poured myself a glass of wine, put on some chill music, and dove in. The water was perfect, the sun was warm, and for a brief moment, I felt like I could actually relax. That's when I heard the gate creak open. The sound of the gate swinging open was like a discordant note in my peaceful symphony. I opened my eyes, squinting against the sunlight, and saw Karen marching across my backyard, her face contorted in a familiar expression of disapproval. Even her walk reeked of indignance. She was wearing a floral sundress that clashed horribly with her complexion, and she clutched a large handbag like it was a weapon. I sighed internally. Here we go again. I treaded water, waiting for her to unleash her latest tirade. Jonathan, she barked, her voice sharp and grating. What do you think you're doing? I took a sip of my wine, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. Swimming, Karen. What does it look like? I replied, keeping my voice calm and even. You're drunk, she accused, pointing a finger at me. And you're being far too loud. I can hear that music all the way in my house. The music was barely audible, it was more like a gentle hum than anything else. And I'd had one glass of wine. One. Karen, I'm perfectly fine, I said, trying to reason with her. I'm not drunk, and the music is at a reasonable level. I'm in my own backyard, enjoying my own pool. I'm not bothering anyone. Yes, you are, she shrieked, her voice rising. You're disrupting the peace. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we don't want your kind of behavior here. That was the first direct shot that really revealed what she thought of me. My kind of behavior? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. What exactly does that mean, Karen? She sputtered, her face turning redder. You know exactly what I mean. You're loud, you're you're just not a good influence on the neighborhood. She paused, drew a deep breath, and got up close to the edge of the pool. I've had enough, Jonathan. I'm calling the police. You're disturbing the peace, and I want you out of that pool. I couldn't help but laugh. The absurdity of the situation was almost comical. Karen, you're calling the police because I'm swimming in my own pool. Seriously? I shook my head, still chuckling. Go ahead. Waste their time. They'll just tell you the same thing I am, I'm not doing anything wrong. I watched as she fumbled in her purse, pulled out her phone, and furiously dialed 911. I rolled my eyes and took another sip of my wine, deciding to just ignore her until the police arrived and told her to get a grip. Little did she know, this charade was about to backfire in a way she could never have imagined. I knew her, but she had no idea who I was, and she was about to find out. I just hoped she had a good lawyer, because she was going to need one. I floated in the pool, watching Karen rant into her phone, her voice becoming increasingly shrill with each passing second. She was embellishing the story, of course, making me out to be some kind of drunken menace terrorizing the neighborhood. I could practically hear the 911 operator's eyes rolling over the phone. After a few minutes, she hung up, her face flushed with self-righteous anger. They're on their way, she announced, pointing at me triumphantly. You're going to regret this, Jonathan. You're going to regret ever moving into this neighborhood. I just smiled and shrugged. We'll see, Karen. We'll see. I closed my eyes, trying to block out her incessant chatter, and focused on the feeling of the water against my skin. I knew this was going to be a long wait, but I was strangely calm. I'd dealt with far worse situations in my career than an entitled neighbor with a vendetta. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man who had dedicated his life to upholding the law, being accused of breaking it by someone who clearly had no respect for it. I thought about all the times I'd had to bite my tongue, to swallow my pride, to navigate the subtle, and not so subtle, racism that had plagued my life. This was just another instance, another hurdle to overcome. But this time, I had the upper hand. This time, the system was on my side. Or, at least, I was the system. It felt like an eternity before I heard the wail of sirens in the distance. Karen perked up, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. They're here, she exclaimed, practically vibrating with excitement. They're going to take you away. I opened my eyes and watched as 2 police cruisers pulled up to the curb in front of my house. 2 officers emerged, their expressions serious but also slightly confused. They walked towards my backyard, their eyes scanning the scene. I recognized them both instantly. Officer Miller and Officer Davis, 2 of the finest officers in the department. And 2 officers who knew me very well. In fact, they worked for me. As they approached the pool, their confusion turned to surprise, then to thinly veiled amusement. Chief Brooks. Officer Miller said, his voice tinged with a chuckle. Is everything all right here? Karen's jaw dropped. She stared at the officers, then at me, her face a mask of disbelief. Chief, she stammered. What do you mean, Chief? He's just a. She trailed off, unable to find the right words to express her outrage. Officer Davis stepped forward, a wide grin spreading across his face. Ma'am, this is Chief Jonathan Brooks. He's the head of the entire police department. Karen's face went from red to white in a matter of seconds. She looked like she was about to faint. But, he's just a neighbor, she sputtered, still struggling to comprehend the situation. That's right, I said, pushing myself up out of the pool and grabbing a towel. And you, Karen, are about to be in a whole lot of trouble. I walked towards the officers, shaking my head in disbelief. Gentlemen, I apologize for wasting your time. This woman called 911 on me for swimming in my own pool, claiming I was drunk and disturbing the peace. Disturbing the peace? Chief, you're the most peaceful person I know. Officer Miller said. "We know all about Karen," Chief Officer Davis said. "You've told us plenty of stories about her antics over the past few months." I nodded, my expression hardening. "Yes, well, her antics have finally crossed the line. Not only did she make a false police report, but she's also been harassing me for months, making racially charged comments and generally making my life a living hell." I decided to not hold back and finally reveal everything she has done over the past months. The officers listened intently, their expressions growing more serious with each passing word. They both knew Karen was a problem. I had told them about her constant complaints, her veiled insults, her overall sense of entitlement. But hearing it all laid out like this, in the context of a false 911 call, was a different story. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, turning to Karen, "making a false police report is a serious offense. And based on what the chief has told us, you could also be facing charges for harassment." Karen's eyes widened in panic. But, he was drunk. And he was being loud," she protested weakly. "Ma'am, we didn't observe any signs of intoxication," Officer Davis said calmly. And the music was barely audible. "The officers had arrived to my house quickly and they were able to witness firsthand that I was not doing anything wrong just like I explained to them. Besides, ma'am, we know where you live, and we have been watching you as well based on suspicion of complaints against you." Karen was finally realizing that she had made a huge mistake. She had called the police on the chief of police, a man who had the power to make her life very, very difficult. It was a truly delicious moment. But it was about to get even better. Because Karen, in her infinite wisdom, was about to make another terrible decision. The realization that she had completely miscalculated the situation seemed to snap something in Karen. Her eyes narrowed, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage, and she lunged at me. "You did this," she screamed, her voice shrill and filled with venom. "You ruined my life." She swiped at me with her handbag, hitting me in the shoulder. It wasn't a particularly hard blow, but it was enough to send a clear message: she was out of control. The officers reacted instantly. Officer Miller grabbed Karen by the arm, trying to restrain her. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," he said, his voice firm. But Karen wasn't listening. She twisted and turned, trying to break free from his grasp. "Get off me," she shrieked. "He deserves it. He's a. She trailed off, searching for the most offensive word she could think of. Before she could utter the slur, Officer Davis stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assault." Karen froze, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Assault?" she stammered. "I didn't assault anyone. He's just trying to get me in trouble." "Ma'am, you physically attacked the chief," Officer Davis said, his voice unwavering. "We saw it with our own eyes." Karen continued to resist, refusing to cooperate with the officers. She screamed and kicked, making it increasingly difficult for them to restrain her. Finally, Officer Miller reached for his taser. "Ma'am, if you don't cooperate, we're going to have to use force," he warned. Karen ignored him, continuing to struggle. With a sigh, Officer Miller deployed the taser. The sound of the taser crackling through the air was like a lightning bolt. Karen's body went rigid, and she let out a piercing scream. She collapsed to the ground, her muscles convulsing uncontrollably. The officers quickly handcuffed her and helped her to her feet. She was still dazed and disoriented, but she was finally under control. As they led her towards the police cruiser, she glared at me, her eyes filled with hate. "This isn't over, Jonathan," she hissed. "I'll get you for this. You haven't heard the last of me." I just shook my head and watched as they drove her away, the flashing lights of the police cruiser reflecting in the surface of my pool. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that had just happened. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. I should be angry, I should be upset, but honestly, I just felt relieved. The nightmare was finally over. After the police left, I went back inside and poured myself another glass of wine, this time, a much larger one. I sat down on my couch and replayed the events of the past hour in my head. It was hard to believe that Karen had actually gone that far, that she had been so consumed by her own prejudice and entitlement that she had resorted to violence. I knew I had to press charges. Not just for the assault, but for the harassment and the false police report. I couldn't let her get away with this. I called my lawyer and explained the situation to him. He was furious, and assured me that we had a strong case. He promised to file all the necessary paperwork and to pursue the matter to the fullest extent of the law. The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews, depositions, and media inquiries. The story had gone viral, of course. Karen calls 911 on black police chief for swimming in his own pool, the headlines practically wrote themselves. I was inundated with messages of support from friends, family, and even complete strangers. People were outraged by Karen's behavior, and they wanted to see her brought to justice. I made a few public statements, condemning racism and discrimination in all its forms. I stressed the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity, regardless of their race, religion, or background. I wanted to use this incident as an opportunity to raise awareness and to promote positive change. Karen, meanwhile, was in jail, awaiting her trial. Her lawyer tried to argue that she had been acting in self-defense, but the video evidence from the officer's body cameras made it clear that she was the aggressor. In the end, she was convicted on all charges: assault, harassment, and making a false police report. She received a hefty fine, a suspended sentence, and a mandatory anger management program. She was also ordered to stay away from me and my property. I knew that the legal outcome wouldn't erase the years of harassment and prejudice I had endured, but it was a start. It sent a message that racism and discrimination would not be tolerated, and that people would be held accountable for their actions. As for me, I'm still recovering from the ordeal. I've installed security cameras around my property, and I've taken steps to protect myself and my family. But I refuse to let Karen's hate and bigotry define me. I will continue to live my life with pride and dignity, and I will continue to fight for justice and equality for all. And you know what? I still enjoy swimming in my pool. Maybe even a little more now, knowing that I won't be disturbed by an entitled, racist neighbor anytime soon. Thanks for listening, Reddit. Justice was served, and sometimes, that's all you can ask for.